A new lobby group has been established working on behalf of Japanese companies building vehicles in southern Ontario. Toyota and Honda have combined to form the Pacific Manufacturing Association of Canada. The two companies accounted for about 3/4 of vehicles produced in Canada last year. Toyota's Canadian plants are in Woodstock and Cambridge. Honda makes vehicles in Alliston. The new association comes amid manufacturing struggles under U.S. tariffs and preparations for new North American trade agreement negotiations.
Two car companies that always compete just did something no one expected. They joined forces. Together, they now speak for most of the cars made in Canada, and they have one big goal: protect and grow the country's auto industry. This move could change how cars are built and sold across North America. For the US, this could mean losing power and jobs in a huge industry. The Pacific Manufacturing Association of Canada, PMAC, launched on April 15, 2026. Honda Canada Inc., Honda of Canada Manufacturing, and Toyota Canada Inc. and Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada are its founding members. The announcement arrived at a moment when the scale of what these two companies represent inside the Canadian economy is only now becoming fully visible to policymakers and the public simultaneously. In 2025, Toyota manufactured 537,470. Two vehicles in Canada. Honda produced 400,587. Together, their Canadian plants assembled RAV4S, Lexus SUVs, Civics and CRVS vehicles, exported to markets across North America and beyond, built by Canadian workers sourced through Canadian and Japanese supply chains embedded in Ontario's manufacturing regions for 4 decades. Collectively, PMAC's founding members accounted for more than 75% of all vehicles produced in Canada last year and employed more than 60% of the country's vehicle assembly plant workers. That is not a coalition of stakeholders. That is the Canadian auto industry organized and speaking with a single coordinated voice for the first time. The context that produced this moment is as important as the announcement itself. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, the Detroit Three that historically anchored Canadian automotive manufacturing, have been reducing their Canadian production footprint progressively over recent years. Toyota and Honda absorbed that withdrawal. Their Canadian operations did not merely grow to fill the gap. They became the foundation on which the entire sector now rests. When PMAC launches and describes itself as representing Canada's 2 largest automotive manufacturers, what it is actually describing is the primary engine of Canadian auto production, period. Dave Jamieson, chair of PMAC and chief executive officer of Honda Canada, framed the moment directly in the founding statement. As together we represent more than 75% of vehicles manufactured in Canada, we look forward to engaging constructively with federal and provincial governments on key policy discussions to represent the unique interests of Honda and Toyota, highlight our long-standing contributions to Canada, and support pragmatic, evidence-based policies that protect Canadian jobs, sustain investment, and strengthen Canada's manufacturing competitiveness and integrated supply chains. That language, protect Canadian jobs, sustain investment, strengthen competitiveness, is not defensive positioning. It is an assertion of institutional commitment from two companies that have been building in Canada since the 1980s and are now formalizing a structure to ensure that commitment is heard at every level of government that shapes the conditions Canadian manufacturing operates under. Tim Hollander, president of Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada and PMAC board member, placed that commitment in historical terms. For more than 4 decades, the teams at Toyota and Honda, along with our suppliers, have invested in Canadian communities, created high-quality jobs, and built vehicles that compete globally. The creation of PMAC reflects the shared responsibility we have as manufacturers to help strengthen the industry's future. 4 decades of investment, 4 decades of plants, supply chains, community relationships, and skilled workforce development in Ontario. The establishment of PMAC is not a response to a crisis. It is the formalization of a long-term industrial commitment into an institutional structure capable of defending and expanding that commitment as the policy environment around it becomes more complex and consequential. The CUSMA review deadline of July 1st, 2026 gives PMAC an immediate and high-stakes policy arena to operate in. The Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement governs the tariff framework for cross-border movement of vehicles and components across North America. The integrated supply chain model that makes Canadian automotive production economically rational, where components cross the border multiple times during the production cycle before a finished vehicle leaves the assembly line, depends entirely on the tariff structure that CUSMA determines. PMAC's inaugural Chief Executive Officer, Brendan Sweeney, whose background spans automotive industry research, leadership at McMaster University and Western University, identified trade policy as the association's primary near-term focus. Where we're also going to be focused a lot is on trade tariffs, CUSMA, negotiations, conversations, whatever that looks like, because it's really important to have tariff-free access to the US market. Canada now enters those negotiations with the organized weight of 3/4 of its vehicle production output positioned as a unified lobby. That is a materially different negotiating context than individual companies advocating separately. The scale of what PMAC represents gives Canada's federal government a clear, concrete, and numerically dominant industrial constituency to reference in every conversation with Washington about what the automotive provisions of CUSMA mean for Canadian manufacturing competitiveness. Beyond CUSMA, PMAC's mandate extends to electric vehicle policy, greenhouse gas emissions, regulations, and regulatory modernization, the full architecture of policy that will determine whether Canada's manufacturing sector is competitive in the transition toward electrified production. Toyota and Honda are both advancing electrification strategies that require long-term investment certainty. PMAC provides the platform through which those investment decisions can be anchored to coordinated government policy engagement rather than navigated independently. Running alongside the PMAC announcement, Toyota made a separate but directly related commitment, more than $300 million invested over 3 years to build 3 new facilities in Canada, including a new head office in Ontario. The investment alongside the association's launch is not coincidental. It is a statement of forward intent, Toyota expanding its Canadian infrastructure at the same moment it is formalizing the institutional structure to protect the conditions that make that expansion rational. The supply chain dimension of what PMAC represents extends beyond the 2 founding automakers. Japan-based automotive parts manufacturers with Canadian operations are included in the association's membership framework. The Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers that established Canadian operations specifically to serve Toyota and Honda's assembly plants, companies whose entire Canadian presence is premised on those factories continuing to run, are embedded in PMAC's mandate. The association is not protecting 2 companies. It is defending an industrial ecosystem. Canada's automotive manufacturing sector has been through structural change before. The transition from Detroit 3 dominance to Japanese manufacturer primacy happened over decades. The current transition, navigating tariff pressure, supply chain disruption, electrification investment requirements, and CUSMA renegotiation simultaneously, is compressing comparable scale of change into a much shorter window. Toyota and Honda formalizing a joint institutional response to that compression is a signal that the companies most invested in Canadian manufacturing are treating the challenge with the seriousness it demands and are doing so by building infrastructure, committing capital, and organizing policy advocacy at the scale their combined production volumes justify. 3/4 of Canadian vehicle output, 60% of assembly workforce employment, 4 decades of manufacturing presence, $300 million in new investment announced this week, and a unified lobbying association, positioned for the most consequential trade negotiation Canada's auto sector has faced in a generation. That is not a defensive maneuver. That is an industry asserting its place